Hey guys, welcome to another exciting session. In this session, we are going to create REST API using JavaScript, NodeJS and Express Server. We are going to create users API from the scratch and we are going to implement CRUD operations, select the bell icon for all the updates. So let's start. So what are the prerequisites for this course? You should have at least minimum knowledge of JavaScript, and if you have the idea about what is Node.js, then that will be very useful. Don't worry if you don't know about Node.js also, that is okay. I'm gonna make it easy for you by explaining all the required things. Let's see the tools that are required. So you need to have Node.js, Express Server, NPM, Visual Studio Code and Postman. And if you haven't installed the Node.js and Visual Studio Code, please go to the Node.js website and install it. So you can go to the Node.js website and there you can download the recommended version, depends on your OS, and install it. And same way you can go to the Visual Studio Code website and install the Visual Studio Code, depends on your OS. And if you have any difficulties installing Node.js and Visual Studio Code, please refer my suggested video where I explained everything clearly. Once you install the Visual Studio Code and Node.js, now we can start creating our project. I recommend you watch this course completely and practice along with me so you get 100% of it. So I am going to create my users API under all folder and users API, and from here I am going to launch Visual Studio Code. To do that, press the shift key and right click, then open command window here, click on it, and here I am going to type code space period symbol. It will launch Visual Studio Code editor for us. So when you press enter, it's gonna launch Visual Studio Code. So you can see that it launched the Visual Studio Code with the path users API. So the path from where we started the command prompt. And now from here, click on the terminal, new terminal. To create any Node.js project, generally we use the command called npm init. So type npm init and press enter. And it will prompt you some questions, just give your inputs, and it's asking for the packaging name. So I'm gonna give users API and then version. You can give any number, but I'm just ignoring, so press enter. Description, users API CRUD operations, and then entry point index.js default. So if you want to change the name, you can change, but I would like to keep the same, so I'm pressing enter. And test command not required, enter. Git repository you can ignore, enter. Keywords you can ignore. Other, if you want, you can give your name and just ignore it, and license ignore it. And it will be creating the JSON file like this, like with this all the values. So it is asking, is this okay? So press enter, and now you can see that package.json file is created under the users API folder. So when you open the package.json file, you can see all the details that we have provided, like users API, user and description. Now it's time to install the Express Server and Nodemon. npm install express space Nodemon. So Nodemon is nothing but a monitor that automatically detects the changes that we made to the files and it makes them available to the server. So we no need to save and run the npm start and again. Press the enter. It's gonna take 1 or 2 minutes. I just pause and resume it. So under the node models, you can see many packages or dependencies that are required for Express Server and Nodemon. Now just type CLS to clear the console. If you remember, we mentioned entry point as index.js, which is the main point. So let's go and create the index.js file. So you can create in different ways. I'm gonna use this file, new file symbol, new file and index.js. Now let's write the actual code. So let express require, and using require we will import the models. So we're gonna say express, and now it's time to initialize the Express Server. So let app equal to express and call it as a function, and then we have to define the route. So let router equal to express dot. So routing refers in determining how an application responds to the client request to the endpoint. So we are going to add some string for the route. So app dot use is the function, and here we are going to say slash API slash comma router. When you write like this, it will append the slash API slash strings to the URL. Now let us define the simple get method. Router dot get, and here we are going to say path slash, just slash, and take the callback function, and this callbacks function will have the three parameters. The one is the request that will be passed to the get method, and then response that will be returned from the get method, and the rest one is next. So next is something about middleware, we will discuss later. And here we need to send the response, right? I am going to return some basic string value, res dot send, and I am going to say John Smith. Now this get method will be called by default when you run the application with the URL and with the slash API slash, and then it will return the John Smith value. So now it's time to implement the listen function. So using listen function, we can listen to the sum of the port number and connect to our host machine. App dot listen, and here we need to pass some port number. I'm gonna pass 5000. Again, you can give any number and take the callback function, and this callback function will be called whenever application is running. So to confirm that application is running, we just print console.log, and we are gonna say app running on. So we are going to mention the URL http localhost, and port number is 5000, and here instead of localhost you can use your IP address of system. So now we are done with the simple get method, and also we are listening to the 5000 port number, and we have initialized the Express server, and we have defined the routing, everything. Now let's run our application. To run the application, we use the command called npm start. So if you use the npm start, now we are gonna get the error. First let us see what is the error we are gonna get, and then see how to solve it. So just type npm start. So when you press the npm start, let's see what happens. And you can see that missing script start. So we need to define this start script inside the package.json. Go to the package.json, and if you see the error, it is saying npm error missing script, right? Go to the package.json, under the scripts, press enter and add start, and then give Nodemon space index.js. So here Nodemon is optional, but we would like to detect the automatic changes, so we are using Nodemon, and the index.js is nothing but our main file. So we need to mention the starting file here. And now let's see what will happen when you call the npm start, cls, and just type npm start. Now it is gonna call, sorry, I didn't save that file, package.json, save it, and now let's run. Now it's gonna call Nodemon index.js. You can see that compilation, everything is over, and you see the test app running on http localhost 5000. So as I said, when your application is running, this callback function get called, and this console log will be printed. So now it's time to test our get method. To test the get method, we are gonna use Postman here. So you can use the Thunder client also, which is extension of the Visual Studio Code. And if you don't know anything about Thunder client, please refer my suggested video. Since many of us know the Postman, I am using the Postman in this session, but you can use the Thunder client also if you already knowing about it. And run the Postman. Just click on this plus symbol, and here I am going to type our address. So, and here we are going to test the get method. So you can see by default we have get. So make sure that we have get method here, and then host 5000, and press the send button, and here you can see that cannot get. So because we need to append the /API/API/ and press the enter. Now you can see the response John Smith here, right? And you can see the status, and status code is 200 and text is OK. So which means call is successful. So whenever the REST API call is successful, you get the status code 200 generally, and the test will be OK. So if you want to pass the custom status code, then you can do it simply by adding the status method. So response.status, and you can just write, let's say 201. Save it, and now let's go to Postman and click on the send button. Now you can see that 201 created. So generally 201 is the status code for creating the resource, or in simple words, when you create the new user, we get the status code 201. So to test the status code, we just use the 201. You can use any status code, like let's say 206 you can use, and go and run the Postman. You can see that 206 and status test is partial content. Change it back to 200. So as of now we are just sending the hard-coded string. So instead of that, let us see how to send the array of users. So for that, I'm going to create the users here. Constant users equal to, I'm going to copy paste the data. So we have the array of users now. You can see that, right click and format document, save it, and now take the users, and instead of sending this hard-coded string, just use the users array. Let's go and click on the Postman, click on the send button, and you can get the users array JSON. So far so good, but in any REST API application, so in any web API or REST API applications, you can see that generally along with the data there will be additional information passed. So not just users data, there will be information like status and status text and some custom message, whether whether the request is successful or not, and the error message if there is any error. So we need to send that data. So for that we need to use the JSON envelope. Now let us use the JSON function and send the data properly and in a more meaningful way. So I'm going to remove this and type res.status. Still we can pass the status code 200.json. I'm sure you know that when you are calling more than one function on this object, it is called method chaining, like status and join. So you can call the functions like this. And JSON, it takes the object, save, and here I'm gonna add some property key values like status, and 200 is the status code, and I'm gonna say status text. Status text is okay because as of now our call is successful, as we are just hard coding the data and passing it. And then let's say message users data, and then add the property called data and pass actual users data. So take the users and pass it from here, save it, go to the Postman and click on the send. Now you can see the data in very meaningful way, like we have JSON object and status text and message. Like that you can add any number of properties as you required and send it, and you can see the data. So if user wants to data from the client side, like from the JavaScript or Angular or React side, you can just call this object.data, then you can get the array of data. And also while implementing the logic, you can check whether object.status text is okay or not, or object.status code you can check, and based on that you can proceed. Back to VS Studio Code. It is about we completed the R function, like reading the data, but you can see that control, logic and data, everything in the single file. So the separation of concern is matters in any application development. So now we need to separate our data from the index.js file to some other files, and then so keep this index.js as thin as possible. So I'm gonna take it out this one, and so we are gonna create the user repository, and for that I'm gonna create the folder called repos repositories, and under that I'm going to create a file called users repo, so like users repo.js. so here we are going to create the users repo module, and we will send the data from here. So let users repo equal to, so we are going to use the object literal, and we are going to define the methods here to send the data. So I am using the method called get and assigning the function for that, and in the get function we are going to return this array of JSON data. Now we have created the module, but we need to export this. So module dot export equal to users repo. Since we are exporting this one, we can access that one in the index.js. So let us access that here. Let users repo equal to, we know that we can use the require method to import any module. So require, and we are gonna provide relative path here dot slash repos slash user repo, and we are not going to use like user repo.js, just we can provide the file name. Save it, and now here let users equal to, and use the users repo dot get function. Save it, and we already mentioned these users here. So if everything is okay, we need to see the data same as previous. So now click on the send button, you can see the data again. And if you think we are getting some catchy data, instead of John does, just mention John Smith here, and just click on it, you can see that John Smith we are getting, right? So this is how you can separate the code. So now let us see the another important thing, that still we have the data hard coded in our users repo module or repository. So actually we need to read this users data from the database or from any file. So as of now I am not gonna implement the database logic in this session. I am gonna cover it in our next session, but as of now I would like to save this JSON data in one file and read the data from that file. To do that, I am going to create a folder called assets. So don't create another repos, and just create the in the project users API level. So click on the new folder, and here you mention assets, and under the assets I am going to add the file called users.json. Just cut this data and paste here, and right click, just format document, you can get the JSON array. Now here we need to read the JSON data from the file. So to do that we can use the file system module. So what is the file system module? File system module is the built-in module of Node.js, using which you can read the file and you can write the content to the file. So now let us import the file system module. So to do that, so you know that you can use the required keyword. So fs, I am mentioning fs, you can give any name here, but we are going to give fs require, and here you must specify fs because the module name is fs. And after that what I am going to do, resolve and reject. So by seeing this you might think that it is like a promise, right? But it is not a promise. It is like promise pattern, but it is not actual promise. So these resolve and reject will be act like a callback functions that we are gonna see soon. To read the file, we need to have the file path. So let file underscore path equal to, again we need to give the relative path here, slash assets slash users.json. Save it, and here I'm gonna read the file using the file system. So f dot read file, and it's gonna take the file path. So file underscore path comma callback function, where we gonna get two parameters, like where we gonna get error and data. So error and data. So if there is any error while reading the file, we get the error object, and if there is no error, then we get the data, right? And here we are going to define if error, if there is any error, then reject it. So take the error and use it here, reject the error. So we are going to call this reject callback function that will be passed from the index.js. So that we will see soon. And then we are going to resolve and we pass data. So right click, format document, everything is cool. And now let's go to index.js, and from here we need to call this get function. So we are already calling the get function, but this is not the way we should call, because now we have changed the signature of the get and implementation of the get. So just remove this, and I'm going to call inside this get function only. So user repo dot get, and you can see that it takes the two parameters resolve and reject. So we are going to pass the two functions as a parameters. So we are going to write function, and this is for resolve, and then function, and this is for reject. Simple. So this is how you should write the logic, so that you don't miss any curly brackets or like that. And so when you pass the callback function resolve, we are gonna get the data in return, right? So data, and for the reject, so we are gonna get error. So error. So when we get the data, and we are gonna use this, and instead of users, now we can use the data, and the function we can just say next error, save it. So here we can see that everything is same, like status code, status test, and everything data fetched properly. Otherwise we are just returning the error here. And now let's go to users repo.js, and you can see that resolve of data. So before we resolving, so when you read the file using the file system, this will be buffer array. So we need to convert that back to the JSON. To do that, we can use the JSON.parse method. But before that, now let us see how it will be if you don't parse it. Let's back to the Postman, and now just click on the send, and you can see that status code everything is there, but now you got the buffer data, and data you can see some 91 like this, the codes are there. So we need to just parse it before we are sending to the get method. So JSON.parse, and save it. So if you run it again, now we get the actual JSON data, right? So this is how you can read the user's data from the file using the file system module. And here we have used resolve and reject as a callback function. So we pass the two functions, like one function for the resolve, the first function, and the second function will be for the reject. So whenever the call is successful, then we are calling the resolve, which means we are calling the first function and by passing the data. So that data we are receiving here. And in the same way, if there is any error while reading the file, we are going to call this reject callback function, and we are passing the error. If there is any error, we will be receiving that here. If you would like to know about callback functions, please refer my suggested video. So by this we completed our read functionality. So till now we have seen how to return the array of users data, but in real-time applications you can see that end users will be searching for the particular user, and when he search for the particular user in backend from the client side, the ID or any other identification will be passed to the REST API. So basically we need to implement the mechanism to get the single item instead of the array of JSON. So to do that, we are gonna create another method called getById. So go to usersrepo.js and take this get function as is, and just use the comma here because this is the property and we should separate the properties by comma in object. And then here get by id, and it's gonna receive the id parameter now along with resolve and reject callback functions. Here as usual we are gonna read the data. If there is error we will reject, if there is no error then we resolve. So now we need to return the single user instead of the array of users, because we need to find the user that is matching to the id passed to the request and return that single item. So to make you understand in detail, I am going to write the code into 3 lines. So let users equal to and this data, so we need to parse it, so cut it and paste here, and after that we need to write the logic to return the single user. So let user equal to, now users is array of JSON, so users dot, so we have the method called find method, and it's gonna take the callback function and it's gonna take the single user. Now here u, and where u dot id equal to id. Save it. And now if you go and see our users.json, we don't have the id field, so let us add the id field. id 1, save it, close this one, and now we need to return this user now instead of the users, sorry. So go to the index.js. Now let's define the another get method which receives the id parameter. So copy this, and you can have the get same, and we are gonna use id here. So we are gonna receive the id, so we have to define the parameter like this, and after that instead of get we have to call get by id and pass the id here. So how to get the id that is passed to the request? So to do that we can use the property called request.params. So let id equal to request.params.id. so whatever the parameters that are passed will be available in the params object. So now pass this id. So we are passing now id and 2 callback functions, and once we receive the data we send it as usual. So if there is no error we should get the result properly. So now we have the URL like this, right? Now just append the id here. So I am going to pass 1 or 2, let's say, and cancel, let hit the send button. There you go. You can see that we got the individual user now data, and we got the single object instead of array of objects, and you can see the id to name Krish, age 34 and gender male. And let us use the another id called 1. Click on that, you get the John Smith, and same way use 3, you get the Mary and gender everything, and you can the status score till 200, and you can see the response everything, right? So this is how you can search the user also. And now let us see how to create the user. In other words, how to implement the post method. Let's go to userrepo.js and let us add another method called create or insert. Anything you can add. I'm gonna add it here. Insert, paste it. So remove this get by id. We are going to pass the user instead of id, and resolve, reject, everything will be same, and file name we are gonna have. And here what we are gonna do, first we are gonna read the data and then we get these users, right? After getting the users we are gonna push this user to the users array. So remove this. So we got the users, and here if user. So if user is not undefined or anything, just we are checking the condition if user, and then users dot push of user. Okay, so now we just adding the user to the user array, and once we added the user array, now we have the users array, right? We should write it back to the JSON file. For that we need to use the write file method instead of the read file method. Here you can write the logic file system dot write file, and here we are gonna mention the file path. So as a first parameter we are gonna pass the file path, so file underscore path, and then we are gonna write this user. So take these users, and here we need to stringify it before we send it. So JSON dot stringify of users, and then another function to receive the error. If there is something wrong, you can get that error. Save it, and now here again write the logic like if there is any error, reject it, else resolve this new data. So take the user and use it here. I hope you are able to follow me. Like we have created the insert method, and we are going to receive the user now in the body of the user request. So in the body of the post request, so we are going to receive this user, and resolve and rejects are like callback functions like we implemented in get and get by id functions. And here first we are going to read the file, and after reading the file, once the reading file is successful, then we are pushing our user to the existing users, then we are writing the entire users array to the file. So write file, this is the stringify users everything, right? And now let's go to index.js and implement the post method. Same way like this, just copy this, and instead of, so let's say creating user, and instead of get, let us use the post, and we don't read any id, and here request response next everything will be same, and we don't require this, and user reported get by id, so you have to use insert, and we are going to pass the user object, right? We will be receiving the user object in the body of the post request, so we need to use request dot body, and this request body is nothing but a user that passed to the post method, and then we are calling the two callback functions resolve and reject, and once we got the data, of course this logic will be same and there will be no changes. Now to make this post method working, now we have to tell the application that we are going to receive the JSON object in the body of the post request. So for that, let us go here and define app.use and mention express.json. We need to tell the application that we are gonna receive the JSON data inside the body of post method. Now let's go and test the post method. Go to postman, and now we don't require this, just give the /API as is, and here take the data, maybe same thing, and we'll be modifying it a bit. And now instead of get method, select the post method. So once you select the post method, click on the body here, and after that by default none is selected. Instead of that, select the raw, and we are gonna pass the JSON, so select the JSON, and here just paste the object that we copied. So now instead of 3, maybe I use 4, and I'm gonna use Vijay. So now we are going to call the post method by passing the user object. So here we are passing the user object id 4, and name is Vijay, and age and gender values. So now when you click on the send, it should go and hit the post method, and it should add this data to the existing users. So click on the send, and there you go. Now we can see that our data fetched successfully. Okay, we need to change this. So now we are not fetching, right? So we can say user created and text okay create, and the status code should be 201, and here also 201. Save it. We have already executed this request, so let's go and see our JSON file. If you go and see our JSON file, you can see that Vijay will be added at the end of the array. So you can see that Vijay is added at the end of the array. So just format it, right click and format document. You can see ID 4. So now let us add another user. So we have already added the ID 4. So ID 5 Adil, and let's go and click on send button again. Now you can see that text create and message user created, and you can see the object returned from the post method, that is like ID 5, name, Adil, everything. And if you go to now just close this, don't save, and click on the user.json, right click and format document. Now you can see that even Adil is also added. This way you can create the resource using the post method, right? So by now we have completed how to read the user, how to search the user, and how to create the user. Now let us see how to implement the update functionality. So for that we need to implement the put method. So before that, let us go and add one function called update. So take the insert function as is, and here instead of insert, just update it as, just rename it as update. And here we are going to receive ID comma user and the resolve and reject functions, because so from the printf point of view, the end user will be updating the single user at a time. So whenever he make any updates to the user from the front end, we need to send the ID of that particular user and the data that end user changed. So we will receive the ID and user, and once we got ID and user, and the same logic we will follow like reading the data. So once we got the users array, we are gonna find the user by using the ID. For that we have already logic like this logic, right? So let us go and use this logic. So we are gonna find the user. So once we find the user, we need to update this user with the new data that is passed. So let's say I'm gonna say new user data. So I say new user data, and here, so now we are going to update this user with the new user data, right? So for that you can use the method called object.assign. So object.assign, and this is the very useful method. So if you are new to object.assign method, please watch my video on object.assign. So now object.assign, and here we have to use the user, so which we got it by comparing the IDs, and after that let us use this new user data. So what the object.assign function will do, it will update the user's object using the new user's data. So for example, we just changed only name, then it just update the name of the new user data to user object instead of updating everything. And then if user, and we don't require to push now here, and we remove the push, and now JSON.stringify of users we will pass. So when you make the changes to this user, the user object from the users array also get updated, because this user will have reference to the users array. So whenever you make the changes, obviously the user from these users also get updated. And now in the controller, let us go and add the put method. So go to the index.js and take this and just use update user, and here we are gonna use method called put, and we are gonna receive the ID, because we should know which user we would like to update. So we are gonna receive the ID, And same way here we need to pass now, instead of insert, update, and here we need to mention the ID. So we know that we can use the request dot params dot id, and then we can pass the request dot body, because we are gonna receive the user object in the body of put request. And then as usual we have the resolve callback function and reject callback function. And here let us mention, instead of create, update, and let's say user updated. So here I'm going to use again 200. So now let us go and test this using the postman. So now select the put method, and here I'm gonna pass the ID, because the ID may be or may not be part of the user request, so we need to pass the ID. So I'm going to pass the ID 2, and if you go and see our users data, and 2 we have Chris, so I'm going to add his initial. So I'm going to add some initial to the Chris. So take this Chris object and here use that, cancel, and instead of Chris use Chris Leela, and we have body, so we will be passing body and JSON, everything will be same only. And now just click on the send. Now we can see that user is updated and message. So you can see the status text updated, message user updated. So now we got the updated data that ID2 and name is Chris Leela. Let's go and see the user.json. You can see that is already updated, and right click and format document. You can see second ID Chris Leela, right? Save it and close this one. As I said, we no need to pass the entire data always, right? So instead of ID, just change only, just pass only age and gender, and change age to 40 and gender to female, and see whether it get updated or not. So again click on the send button, and there you go. Now you can see that we got the updated object back. ID2, name Chris Leela, age 40 and gender female. So we have passed now age 40 and gender female. So even though we just passed partial data, we got the object updated. So you got the user updated and we got the updated data. So this is how you can use the put method to update the resource. And about error handling, if you pass some ID that is not existed, 6, and if you click on the send button, what will happen? So couldn't get response, and if you go here and use the terminal, we can see that we are getting some errors saying that so cannot convert undefined or null to object. So we got the error here, object.assign, there we got the error. So we need to handle the exception here, right? Whenever we pass invalid ID, we will be getting the error here, right? For that, what we can do, if user, and then do this, means if user is found and not undefined, then do that, otherwise reject error and reject, and we are gonna say user not found. So we're gonna say user not found. So before that, let us create a error. Let's say let exception equal to new error, and we are gonna say user not found, and use the ex is it, and then just return. Now let's go and run it again. Go to the postman and we are gonna run it now. When we don't have the id 4, actually this id is 6 say 4, so id is 2 I think. So just click on the send. Now we got the error saying that user not found, so we got the error message. So even you can just handle this very beautifully, like you don't need to just send the error like this. Instead of that, we can just use this. And so here what we can do, let's say 404 and use the 404. So we are going to receive the error, right? So error dot message, and even you can add one more property called error, and we are gonna say error dot message, because this error object will be having the property called message. And that's it. I think that is enough. And now remove this user updated and data. If you want to pass the entire error, you can just pass the error also instead of okay we will pass like this. Okay, so we are not going to get any data. Now let's go and hit. So now we got the response in a readable way, like status 404, and you can see that as test user not found and error is object. So because here the error is object, so we get the error object. So instead of that, maybe you can just say message again. So we are going to have the another session where I will be covering all the exception handling. As of now, don't worry about that. Now let us see how to implement the delete method and how to delete the user. So I am gonna define the delete method in the user repository. So like the update, take this entire thing, copy it, paste, and instead of update it should be delete. And we are gonna pass the id now, and we don't require new user data here, because so whatever the item that user wants to delete, that items or users id we are gonna need. So id and resolve, and the same way we are gonna read it. And once we got the data, so here we need to find the index of the user using the id passed to the request. So after getting the users, let us say index users. So you can use the method called find index, and here we are gonna match with the id that passed to the request. So once we got the index, and we are gonna check it, index not equal to index greater than -1. So which means if we found the user, then what we are gonna do, we are gonna remove the user using the index. So you can use the method called splice, user dot splice, and where we gonna provide the index. Here index, and how many items you would like to remove? Only one item, so 1. And then if you don't found it, we can simply use this again, error user not found, and return it error. And if we found that user, let's go and write that user's data to the JSON file, because now whenever we delete it, automatically this user object will be updated, and the updated user's data we are gonna write it to the file. And let's go to index.js and we implement the delete function here. So take these, and here delete user, and it's gonna take the id parameter again, because we need to pass the id, and instead of put, use the delete method. And here you don't require the request at body, and also this function should name delete and request.json. So once this is successful, we are gonna say user deleted, same way user with id, and let's say request dot params dot id deleted, and then data. And same way, if you don't find it or if you got any error, we are gonna say, and we are gonna return this error. So we don't require data now here. And also in user repositories, in delete method, we don't have the user here. So when resolving it, we don't have the user. So what I'm going to do, instead of user, just we can resolve like user got deleted. Okay, and we gonna get the data. So go to the postman and select the delete now, delete, and here I'm gonna use the id 2 and click on the send, and there you go. You can see that user deleted and user with id 2 deleted. So we don't have space here, just give space. So now let's go and check the users.json and format document, and you can see the user with id 1 and id 3, and you don't have the user with id 2, so it got deleted. And just close that, don't save, and now try to delete it again. Click on that. Now we get that error saying that user not found, right? And try to delete something with 4. Click on send button. Now we get that user got deleted and it is successful, right? So this is how you can delete the user using the delete method. By now we have completed all our CRUD operations like creating the user, reading or searching the user, updating the user, and deleting the user. So if you observe, you have written so much duplication of code, and also we need to handle the errors in very beautiful way, not like this. So we are gonna do the exception handling and also code refactoring in our next session, and also we are gonna create a application in JavaScript and implement the CRUD operations from end to end. I hope you understand the concepts, and if you like the video, please click the like button and share it with your friends and subscribe to my channel.